we were together for like 6 months for every day for the first time in 7 years. So actually that was a big silver lining for COVID, and relieved to find out we still liked each other, remembered each other's names and everything. But she was traveling up here every weekend ordinarily. So that was how we started it off. But then we had two COVID grandbabies during that time. Two of our grandbabies were born during the first year of COVID, and they're out in Seattle. So to go see them, we realized that we couldn't fly, of course. And we really weren't comfortable driving. If to go to Washington State, you would have to quarantine for 10 days once you get there. So we bought an RV, and I've never been in an RV before. I've still never been in anyone besides this one. And so drove back and forth across the country. I've made the trip across country now 8 times. And that's just what it takes, to be with your family during this time. So so never want to be a big rig driver. I learned that. I thought I wanted to drive the big rigs, but don't really want to. So, and I got to go spend time with my mom. I worked remotely. My mom's in Southern California out in the Mojave Desert, and still taking care of a 10-acre ranch. She's 94. So I went and stayed with her for 6 weeks, which was really terrific. It's the longest we'd been together in 40 years, 45 years. So that was really terrific, silver lining of COVID, for me. So, I mean, you get the idea. It's been quite a journey and a lot of miles, and, some fun times, a lot of sad times too. I mean, it's been very hard to have, to have Sargent, have the doors on Sargent locked, that's been pretty tough to deal with in a lot of ways. So I don't know, that kind of gives you the idea.
So yeah, absolutely. So you and your wife were able to join together as a team. And I mean, that's one of the things, just thinking back to a lot of our times on Sargent, we do a lot of group projects and teamwork. Talk about the team that you had in place to support you from an academic perspective, from a finance perspective, from an admin perspective.
Yeah, so really another silver lining, I think. It's actually a little common, I guess, to hear people refer to seeing people's strength come through under times of stress or duress. And, really Sargent, which I already recognize to be an incredible place, you start to find out how incredible it is when you have something as daunting as a pandemic hit. And so you can imagine the kinds of challenges we had to deal with. For example, we have at least 6 clinics. It depends on how you count, but at a minimum, we have 6 clinics, including the BU Physical Therapy Center, which is a commercial sized operation. A very large operation, and so to close those things overnight is pretty daunting, and then to keep that operation going so that we're serving our patients and continuing to train our students and continuing to do our research projects is also very daunting. But the best example I really have of teamwork at Sargent is this physical therapy team that kept the clinic going almost without, really without an appreciable break in service. Within a couple weeks, they were at 25% of their normal patient visits, which to me is just incredible. And they were doing those by telehealth. So really incredible, dedication by those folks to, rise to that occasion, to learn those new skills, and to commit themselves to this notion that you could be an effective therapist as a physical therapist remotely. So we also had, so many teams. I mean, there were faculty support teams. We converted, as many of you know, we converted to what was called a Learn from Anywhere format. A very, very challenging format for faculty. You're basically teaching an online course and an in-person course at the same time, all while trying to maintain public health protocols in your classroom. So very challenging, required all kinds of new skills, new equipment, new protocols. It was very difficult transition. But I'm glad Karen Jacobs is on here, because Karen headed the team that coached the faculty through this transition, and effectively, kept instruction going throughout the last academic year. You can imagine also in all of this the challenges for information technology were really unbelievable. I mean, you had people using setups, computer setups and teaching setups that they hadn't used previously. Suddenly they have to be not just proficient, they really have to be expert in a lot of these uses in order to sort of this learn from anywhere is really, pat your head and rub your tummy kind of work. And so that required a lot of IT support. The IT support also needed to bring about the the community safety protocols, something I can talk about more. But very, very daunting, large scale problems. And then I really can't say enough about our buildings and grounds people. They were there every day. They didn't go remote. When the building, if you remember, in the early days of the pandemic, we were washing groceries, right? And coming in from the store and changing all your clothes and throwing them in the laundry. And, we really didn't know what we were dealing with. But under those conditions, our buildings and grounds people came to work every day and, sterilized all the surfaces that people were using, and continued to, do their jobs just as they had all along. So, BU is a very big place. It's actually far larger than the town I grew up in. It just takes so many people and so many different teams to keep it going. And so, Sargent's part in this has been remarkable. I mean, we've kept our students at the front of our thoughts, at the front of our operations, as our primary focus. And our students have continued to make progress toward their academic objectives, which not all institutions can say that. Our students, especially I should say, our clinical students remained on track for their timely graduation, which is, we can talk more about that too. I mean, a very, very daunting challenge.
So sticking on the topic, and I'm really glad you took a minute to really thank our facilities workers, our custodians that literally went in multiple times a day and wiped down every doorknob. I think that's, when you think about a team, they're a large part of our team. So I'm glad you included them. So as most of us know, great leadership starts at the top. Bob Brown has been a very successful leader for years at Boston University. What was life like for you during COVID with President Brown and Provost Morrison and their leadership?
Yeah, that was actually a really remarkable part of the BU response. So, I would have to say that leadership made me feel like this was the safest place in the country to be. Maybe the safest place in the world. I mean, I felt so, I felt like my public, my safety, my health and safety were really at the forefront of all of the planning. So, to give you one of the most remarkable examples of this, I'm sure you're all familiar with the different organizations you're part of, with what the response was to testing, for example. When testing became available, a lot of places contracted with labs, things like Quest and labs like that, commercial laboratories, or with other institutions to create a testing protocol. BU took what I think was really very courageous step. I mean, courageous in a lot of ways, not the least of which is in terms of the budgetary or the financial commitment. Bob Brown just went all in right away and established a clinical laboratory um, that is capable of testing every single member of the BU community every week. So if the virus gets into the community, which it does, 10 students or 10 people tested positive today. Actually 11, I think. So the virus will get into our community, but we'll detect it very quickly. And with contact tracing, we have a very, very aggressive contact tracing protocol. We'll be able to identify and protect those people who have been exposed. So even now, when we have well over 90% of our campus population is vaccinated, some people do have religious or medical exemptions to vaccination, but 100% of the campus is compliant with that expectation. And even at that, then we still have cases popping up, these breakthrough infections. And with 100% testing, which was created and established under Bob Brown's leadership, we can feel safe that the virus isn't circulating, sort of rampantly through our community, which I think there are many places where you can easily imagine that the virus is sort of running free through those, especially where there are large numbers of unvaccinated people. So, when I talk to parents, a lot of times the conversations go to safety, and we compare, what are the protocols that their student is living in under, their conditions at home, versus what are the conditions that they're required to live under at BU. And invariably, the distinction is easy to make, that our community is really one of the safest places you can be. It's hard to imagine what we could do that could make it even safer, and still retain any kind of sense of our normal operations.
Yeah.
So
I think important to know too, everybody's being tested. Have you picked what's your testing day?
Yeah, 100% surveillance testing. Yep. At least once a week. I've been tested twice this week. For a variety of reasons, people can change their testing schedule up as they need to. So we're close to, I think, 7,000 tests a day now.
Yeah.
So really quite remarkable.
Yeah, so important to note, not only are students getting tested, faculty are getting tested, custodians are getting tested, our dean's getting tested. So it really is, it's campus wide. So when you step foot on campus that we can't come to campus unless we have a green badge that shows we don't have symptoms and we've been tested regularly for everybody, which is, can only imagine what's gone into it, but just so nice to know that when you send a child, your loved one, to Sargent, we're pretty safe on campus. And like you said, I can't think of anywhere else besides my own home and my own four walls where I feel as safe as I do at work. I just want to let everybody know the chat feature is open. If you have questions during tonight's talk, please type them in at any time, and we will also be answering questions live and saving some for the end. So please feel free to add those in. So let me
say one more quick thing about COVID, and then we'll leave COVID in the dust. I hope. we talk about COVID way too much, I'm afraid, but it is pretty consuming. And that is one of the really interesting things about the pandemic and BU's response. With 100% surveillance testing, we could sit and watch, as the Delta variant came in and replaced the original virus. We can watch for the Mu variant to arrive. It hasn't arrived at BU yet. We can measure with real precision what the breakthrough rate is into people who are vaccinated. So we get information that that isn't available when you're not doing 100% surveillance testing. So many people who are vaccinated who might test positive for the Delta variant aren't going to be symptomatic. So you don't know about many of these breakthrough infections. So it's a very interesting, from a scientific perspective, I mean, it's a very interesting experiment that's going on. Then I'll leave it
So
alone.
again, going back, what makes Sargent Sargent? Not only its amazing students, but its faculty and its staff. And so many people hear in the news during COVID, you know, X company had to cut their budget or people got laid off. And I was thrilled as we prepared tonight's talk to hear you talk about how Sargent actually grew during the pandemic. And that's a testament to you going to our provost, Jean Morrison, and saying, you know, here's what we need, and you being able to advocate for us. So how did Sargent grow during the pandemic?
Yeah, that's been really interesting. Sargent continues to grow in terms of being an identified school for more and more students, graduate and undergraduate students. We had far more applicants this year to our graduate programs than we've ever had before. We can't really handle any more than we did, than we have in the past. We're pretty maxed out. But what it means is that we have the opportunity, because we have so many incredibly talented applicants, it gives us sort of the opportunity to craft a class. We can really think in terms of admitting a whole cohort rather than admitting, so much the case of admitting individuals based on simple numeric credentials, which isn't always, a satisfactory experience for the students who come. So that's been a real challenge and an opportunity for our admissions folks. That in our undergraduate programs, our health science program, which many students enter to go into public health, for example. Many also go into med school or a whole number of health-related professions. That program is now the 4th largest undergraduate program at BU. So it's up there in size with programs like psychology and biology and programs like that you might not, you don't think of health science as being a gigantic program, but it is. It has more than 600 students now. So very, very large program. I mean, it's actually so large that we have to really start thinking about new organizational structure for it in a way that serves the students, better than thinking of them as, 150 students at a time. That's not really consistent with what we normally do with our Sargent students. And then in the graduate, was there a question?
Yeah, we'll get to it in a second. We can actually I can answer it personally from teaching. But why don't you finish your thought on this?
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
So the question is, I understand there are no virtual classes that are currently available. If a student tests positive for COVID, are they required to quarantine for 2 weeks? Yes. What educational provisions are made for students under quarantine? So I can take this or you can take this.
Go ahead, give it a run.
So, because I'm living through this right now. So I do currently, I teach a class on the US healthcare system. I have 3 students currently in quarantine. My TAs serve as peer note takers for the students that are currently in quarantine. So immediately after class, the student not only gets access to all of my lecture slides, but also gets access to the TA notes. And although we're not supposed to be on Zoom anymore, I have Zoom office hours for my students in quarantine, so they can immediately ask questions from the material. So that's how I have been supporting in my office hours. I mean, the beauty of Zoom, if a student has class when I don't have my normal office hours, I'm fine to Zoom with them from home. So that's a good question, and important to know how we are supporting our students that are in quarantine.
That's a really important question too. I'm glad you asked that. I think that was Janet asked that. The rest of it though is that with the population being so heavily vaccinated, that the number of students in quarantine should be far lower than what we experienced last year. So contact tracing to vaccinated students can be addressed with closer surveillance. That's a great question. Thank you for
Yeah,
that.
great question. And every faculty member, at least in Sargent that I know of, because we all, talk to each other, because we want to try to have the same policy for everybody. So the students know exactly, here's what you're going to get as soon as class is over. And here's how the faculty are still going to be available to you. Our exams are now on ExamSoft. So exams now are online. So if a student is in quarantine, they can continue. They don't have to worry about if there's an exam on Monday and they're in quarantine for 10 days, that they can't take the exam for 10 days. They can still take their online exams like they normally would with their peers. Okay, so Chris, let's go back to growth of graduate programs. And then also, did we have any faculty or staff growth during COVID?
Yeah, so surprisingly we did. So last year was we were able to hire a couple new faculty. A couple of those were, one in particular was long in the planning and we were in our second year of that search. So really looking for that perfect fit. And I just announced that yesterday. If you follow Sargent on Instagram, you saw our announcement where you can go to our Sargent webpage at bu.edu/Sargent and see that news announcement. We're super excited to announce that our new department chair of occupational therapy is Emily Rothman. It's been a very long journey getting there, probably 3 or 4 years in planning, if not longer. Emily steps into the shoes filled by Wendy Koster for more than 20 years. Wendy is a very widely, highly regarded scholar. She was one of the really attractive scholars at Sargent that brought me here. She is an incredibly well-known person in working with people with disabilities, identifying what disability is. And so filling her shoes was not a trivial issue. And we had a long search. We had quite a number of applicants. And even during the pandemic, then we were able to complete this search and hire Emily Rothman. Emily comes to us from the School of Public Health. She has a population health perspective on a very wide range of topics, but including things like partner violence, domestic violence, and autism. I mean, the whole range. And she's a very active advocate for inclusion. And it just makes her a perfect fit for Sargent and for our OT department. So we're thrilled to have her. It was very scary. We were about 4 days there in the transition where we didn't have a department chair. So Gail Orsman filled in for a few days. So in addition, one of our priorities at Sargent is addressing health equity. We had long planned to hire a faculty member who had scholarly expertise in health equity and particularly in ways to remediate health inequities. So we were really thrilled to add Hagare Yilma, who is a new faculty member in Kelly's department, Health Science. She joined us just this past week. She comes to us from, I always mix up GW or Georgetown?
GW.
GW, down in DC. And really a terrific young scholar. We're thrilled to have her. I can't wait to see what she brings to Sargent. it's so fun meeting these folks that I've only met on Zoom. When I met, actually, even when I met Emily, when I met Hagari, it's like, actually, I just met a new dean at a reception this evening, and you have no idea how tall somebody is going to be. And I just have to stop myself from going, oh, you're much taller, you're much shorter than I thought. So
That comment wouldn't go so well.
no, it just doesn't work. So you don't say it, but it's it's been really fun meeting these. I mean, hiring people over Zoom, you wouldn't really think it would be possible, or at least not practical, but it has really been incredibly successful.
Yeah, and important for people to know, just behind the scenes, what happens when you hire faculty. It's at least a full day, if not 2 full days of meetings with people. And typically you'll have a meal with them, whether it be lunch, whether it be dinner, to really get to know them. And everything due to COVID has been on Zoom. So you've seen people's cats walk by in the background as they're doing their teaching demonstration. It's been very interesting. Let's talk about clinical skills training. So during COVID, I mean, our PT program, speech language hearing sciences, our OT program, their clinical skills training is critical for them to be able to graduate, and clinics closed. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, this was a really big challenge right from the start, to try and figure out how our students were going to get their required clinical training. We essentially promise students that they will be ready to be licensed and certified when they graduate, that they'll be able to sit for their national exam, that they will have completed their didactic training as well as their clinical training. So a lot of that depends on our community partners. We have more than 1,400 community partners. Those are clinics and hospitals and schools all over the country, where our students go to receive additional training in the field, depending on the field. So, in OT, they call that field work. In SLP, they call those clinical externships. And so we're sending these students out all over the place, even to nursing homes. And so you can imagine that the past year, nursing homes certainly closed and locked the doors. And most clinics did too. The strategy or the tactic that they adopted right away was to keep a minimum number of people on site. And so that certainly didn't include trainees. And so our students were closed out of many of those opportunities. We actually flew several students home from their sites because in a couple cases, they weren't even able to start, their first day at their really important clinical practicum. So, trying to deal with those many cases, we have hundreds of students that are out on these experiences at any time. We have one office, all they do is work on these external clinical experiences. So trying to figure out how they're going to, continue to make progress and how it's going to be applicable to their eventual licensure has really been a challenge. I'd have to say, so first of all, we did, our faculty and supervisors and clinical partners did rise to that challenge. They found ways with each student to make this happen. So our students got through. We didn't have students that were delayed because of COVID. So that was absolutely unexpected. This is one of those, I used to say I love these problems that don't have a solution, but it has to be solved. Those get called wicked problems. I don't really love those so much anymore. That was enough. I got the idea. But we kept those students on track, and what we learned from that, I mean, there were silver linings from that. We obviously couldn't put those students with patients in all those cases. And what we learned is that we could teach our students quite a lot through simulation, where they could either interact with a patient who is simulated on computer, so not even a real person. Some of the simulations are pretty primitive. They're like, if you're as old as I am, you might remember a computer version of Dungeons and Dragons, where you could just type in something and it would type in something and type in something. Some of the simulations are that crude. But other simulations actually include video and a variety of patient responses, changes in patient severity and things like that. So we've learned a lot about how valuable simulation can be, so much so that we've actually really thrown in our commitment to simulation. We will be establishing a clinical simulation laboratory at Sargent now, in recognition of this value that we've just experienced over the past 18 months.
So I was going to ask you that in a few minutes, but now that you just started to, so talk, what is the simulation lab?
What's that?
What is the simulation lab?
So simulation can be a lot of different things. You're probably familiar, for example, with the CPR mannequins. Where if you've ever taken a CPR class, it's very common that you would practice CPR on a mannequin. That's a kind of simulation. Then there are these computerized simulations where you're interacting, in the better ones, you're interacting with a video. It's a little bit like a video game. It's not a very fun video game. It's a very interesting video game. No action, no shooting. But the simulation, I think that we're really starting to value most is the simulation that relies on what are called standardized patients. So standardized patients are skilled people, actors basically, who learn everything they need to know about representing or portraying a patient with a particular disorder or constellation of disorders. And these standardized patients actually, on their vita, they talk about the different things that they are capable of simulating, the different disorders that they're capable of simulating. The really amazing thing about this is that now, imagine this, if you're doing clinical training, your professor can look at what you've experienced so far and see that, oh, this student has never worked with a stroke patient. That can't happen. And so you can't go wait in the clinic until a person with a stroke shows up. And when they do show up, it's going to be too mild, or that seems like a terrible thing to say about a stroke, but too mild for the patient, for the student's clinical, expertise that they need to develop, or too severe. So, a standardized patient can adjust severity, can adjust symptoms. And when the student is having difficulty sort of understanding what needs to be done in terms of diagnosis or treatment, the professor can step in, stop the simulation, rewind, and start again and get it right the next time. So the student gets immediate feedback with a patient who is completely sensitized and devoted to the student's experience. So it's not nearly the same as real clinical skills, of course, but it's incredibly valuable with a student who has never experienced. It's easy to imagine that many students, the first time they experience a person who has had a stroke, would be in their clinical rotations. That may not be good, for the student. That may not be the best for the patient, and it may not be the best in terms of their learning opportunity. So putting a very new student in front of a standardized patient and having them go through different kinds of severity, different presentation of symptoms, even different disorders, different appearance of symptoms in different parts of the body at different times and things like that, different challenges that can be issued to the patient, can really be just amazing. And so, I don't know, you can tell I'm pretty enthusiastic about this.
I can't wait. I can't wait till it opens. I want to go back to school.
We met with the architectural team today for the first time. We had our kickoff meeting today, and I'm beyond excited. It's really amazing.
Can alumni come back and see too?
Absolutely. It'll be a bright spot on the tour. This should be one of our crown jewels at Sargent, and it should be Yeah, it should be everything we hope it should be. I mean, the meeting today was just so energizing.
I can't wait to see it. So a comment came in, Marla. Her daughter started her practicum this week at Sargent. Faculty has been amazing in helping her achieve a match for her senior year. So Marla, I'm actually the faculty member that placed your daughter.
I actually didn't realize that until I like just fun. It was funny. I actually asked Maddie, and she goes, "Oh, she's the head of." So I actually paid you a compliment without knowing it was you.
Thank you. Thank
So
you.
thank you.
You're welcome. So part of my role, just so everybody knows on the faculty, not only do, I mean, our clinical programs, the students have to get clinical training in order for our programs to be accredited, and students need it in order to sit for licensure exams. But at Sargent, we really value practical experience. Every health sciences student, every human physiology student, Wesley, you're here with us, you did your practicum. They are required to do a practicum internship for credit, and we help to place them. And we were able to place every single student, the class of 2020, 21, and now we're working on our 22s. It was, a lot of phone calls reaching out to friends. Can you please take one of my students? Our students that are interested in public health, a lot of them served working for the Department of Public Health in Massachusetts. A lot of them worked for the Department of Transitional Assistance, helping people who are experiencing homelessness, food insecurity, and helping them, just through some really hard times. Marla's daughter is working over at the Dimmock Community Health Center in Boston, helping patients access services, whether it's help paying for medication or transportation or interpreting services, or help with, food insecurity or paying for an electrical bill. So our students are really, really, really on the forefront of helping people that are going through some very challenging times, on top of our PTOT, speech language hearing sciences, nutrition students, doing their clinical training. Our undergrads in health sciences and human physiology are really doing some extraordinary work right now too. Sorry, I just went off on that tangent. Now you can see how passionate I am, Chris, about what I do.
Yeah.
So now I want to switch gears a little bit. Is something else that's very near and dear to my heart is talking about the Sargent Cares Fund. So the Sargent Cares Fund, our dean set up to help our students who are experiencing financial hardship, whether it be food insecurity or they can't afford the technology that they need to be able to sit in the classroom. For those of you that read the story about my student, Sarah Wade, in Inside Sargent, she came out to her family that she was gay, and her family walked away from her and stopped all financial support. And she came up to me and said, "What do I do?" And I said, "We have this great dean, and he set up this fund. Can you, besides Sarah's story, can you talk a little bit more about the fund?"
Yeah, so this has been a really an amazing kind of experience. So the fund is actually due to our advisory board, my dean's advisory board, just remarkably committed supporters to the college. And in our conversations early on, when the pandemic hit, there were a lot of concerns raised. We sort of stopped thinking about strategic planning for a minute, which is usually these are my big sky partners. We're looking at the long horizon to see where we're going to take Sargent in the next 5 years. But suddenly we were looking at something much more immediate, and with the leadership of this advisory board, we set up a fund that was for short-term, rapid response, basically for primarily graduate students was the big motivation initially, because we call it Sargent Cares because there was the Cares Fund that was already established for undergraduates. And many of our students were able to benefit from that government support that came through BU and was then channeled from BU through to them. But graduate students weren't eligible for that sort of support. And the remarkable part of this story is that is that students would sort of, I often hear from students who are struggling for one reason or another, and I was hearing from more students than usual during that time, of course. But their needs were just so surprising because the needs just weren't so immense. I think what you might anticipate is you would get these just gigantic, students would be faced with really gigantic shortfalls, in their planning. But in fact, you would have students who, we had a student who came to me, she just wanted to borrow a computer. She wanted to know if I could lend her a laptop from our media center. And I said, well, why do you need a laptop? It's unusual for a student to try and, complete college these days without a laptop. And so she explained that she had bought a used laptop. It had worked for a short time. It stopped working. And she was using her roommate's laptop when she didn't need it. It was, really, when you think about trying to do an intense college curriculum remotely without a laptop, it just really wasn't practical. And so we could buy this student a laptop and she was up and running. It was just, a laptop it just doesn't come into the, top of a person's financial planning when they're planning for their, to support their university education. And so, being able to provide that level of assistance for this student actually kept her in school. So, and I have so many stories like that of students with really, I would call them fairly modest amounts of support, emergency scholarship support that kept them at Sargent, kept them on track, and kept them sort of afloat until they could, in many cases, it was, their parents' situation where their parents' income had been dramatically reduced because of COVID. To where their parents' situation could recover and they were back to sort of their normal status. And so many stories like that. And I'm really incredibly proud of how the Sargent community rallied around. And a sort of, wonderful offshoot from that is that with Christina's leadership, we have made this one of our pillars in our fundraising, and it was the focus of our Giving Day this year. And so now we have that fund available as an emergency fund for any Sargent students who, find themselves sort of in unplanned situations and just need a little bit of help. I have to add a little bit of a personal note to that. My father-in-law, who lived to be 99, and he lived with us for 7 years when I was down in Maryland. He used to tell a story. He was an MIT grad, and he used to tell a story about his, I don't think I've told you guys this story before. He would talk about his roommate who came from very disadvantaged circumstances and basically just sort of got to the end of the line and didn't have any more funds to carry him through his MIT education. And so he went. So this is in I don't know, gosh, must have, let's see, in the 30s, I think, the 1930s. And the student went to the dean, and the dean gave him $1,000 toward his education at MIT, and that kept the student enrolled. And 20 years later, that student actually ended up employing my father-in-law.
Wow.
So, it just has this great sort of circular thing to it. And my father-in-law could not tell that story without crying. And I heard him tell that story many times. And so when he learned that I was going to be a dean, that was his first advice. He said, you need to be this kind of dean. And I've always sort of kept that in the back of my mind. It's like, all right, I need to do right by Hank. And so I hope this does right by Hank. I don't think we can name it after him, but.
We'll think about Hank now every time we donate to Sargent Cares. We'll do it in Hank's memory. So if a donation comes in memory of Hank to Sargent Cares, you'll know who it came from.
Wouldn't that be amazing? Yeah.
So I want to touch base on two more topics. One is talking about, so campus is repopulated.
Yeah.
Campus doesn't look much different walking up and down Com Ave right now than it did in 2018. What did it take to reopen Sargent?
Again, Bob Brown, our president, and Gene Morrison, our provost, organizing their teams into a whole array of, efforts, making sure that we can come back safely and that we can be responsive to changes in the situation. So not only are we here and fully repopulating the campus, but we're also ready for changes in the situation. So, there's a lot of contingency planning in addition to sort of the obvious things that are happening. So, for example, we had matriculation. I think that was an anxiety-provoking moment for a lot of people. I mean, you had, I think, 5,000 people in a Gannis arena. And the students were shoulder to shoulder on the floor of the arena. That is something we felt confident we could do safely. The students were all tested and free of symptoms on that day. And so we just have this level of confidence in the safety of the environment that we can create, that we're able to, for example, require that we are back in person, that all of the benefits of being a residential program, of being a residential educational experience, we feel like we're in a position now to safely reap all of those benefits. That isn't to say there isn't some residual anxiety, that's still floating around out there. When I first stepped, back onto a fully populated campus, I won't say that my blood pressure didn't go up a little bit, or my pulse didn't race a little bit. So, it's a little unsettling, to be in big crowds. And, but, we're doing it day by day, and people are getting more and more comfortable every day. More and more classes are meeting, more and more meetings are happening. And I think it's starting to feel perfectly normal and perfectly safe. And we feel perfectly, reassured that, we're prepared for what we know right now. And we're prepared for a variety of contingencies that we might anticipate. There was a lot of taking things down. We took down all these signs that said you could only go one way in a corridor. Signs that said you could only, have one person in a multi-person restroom at a time. So we took down all of that stuff. We had all of these classrooms had been outfitted for Learn from Anywhere with microphones and cameras and laptops, took all that down. So, some big changes, repopulated the residence halls so that, they're at full occupancy now. They were at way less than full occupancy last year. So, it's great, actually. It feels like BU. I mean, I feel like, I've, thirsty man that finally got a glass of water. It just feels like the way it ought to be.
I was thrilled. I got to see our dean in person last Friday for the first time by chance. And it was just like this sense of relief. It's like we're back. And I think seeing you really made it I'd already taught my first class, but seeing you made it real. Let's talk about the future. I'm interested to hear this, and I hope everybody else is too. What are your goals for this year? And what are your, what's your long-term plan? What's your year plan, short-term goals, healthcare terms? What are your short and long-term goals?
Yeah. So, I think that's why I'm so energized, being back on campus. We're not reacting to things as much these days as we were in March 2020, May 2020, April 2020. All we were doing was reacting, to the situation on the ground. I mean, now we are back to normal planning kinds of operations. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons I was so energized by this kickoff meeting this morning with these architects. I mean, I love working on these, incredible new facilities for our students. And so, I think that's one of the things I'm really just very enthused about. So creating this new simulation, clinical simulation laboratory. We're going to put the Academic Service Center, which is where our academic counselors, academic advisors work. We're going to put them down on the first floor. We're building a beautiful new advising facility for them on the first floor. New student lounges on the second floor. We are really hoping to get to our anatomy lab. Our anatomy lab is one of the hardest working spaces in all of BU. It's the only cadaveric instructional lab on the Charles River campus. And that room just gets worked so hard, it really needs renovation. So really hoping to get to it and upgrade all of its audio visuals and things like that. So lots of facilities plans. We have at least 6 new searches we're going to do this year. So one of the most important things that we do is, we find new teammates. So, this is draft season for academics, and we're starting to plan this year's draft. And we have just really exciting plans across all of our departments to add new faculty members. In most cases, replacing retirements. And so some of those retirements have been for a while. So Ken Holt, for example, we're filling that slot. We're really enthused about these searches. We use these searches, these new faculty members, we can use them to advance our strategic planning. So all these pieces kind of work together if you're doing things right. And so, for example, one of our 5 objectives is to address health equity and health inequities. But another one is to harness the power of data science, or what people recognize as big data, or machine learning, or artificial intelligence, or data wrangling, or a whole bunch of different terms that all fall under this umbrella of data sciences. Harnessing the power of data sciences to resolve these health inequities and to help us, plan better treatments. So we'll be hiring a faculty member who uses the ad has us looking for a person who relies on methods of data science to improve health systems in rehabilitation. So that's all kind of a tall order. There are people that do that. But to give you an example, one project that we're working on right now is mining all of our existing patients with knee pain. All of those patients, all of the patients in the interurban health system, all of those patients, taking all of their experiences, all of their treatments, all of their outcomes, all of their diagnostic information. So an incredible amount of information, applying all of that information to this artificial intelligence approach, and predicting or recommending with a predicted outcome for one patient. So we're trying to harness all of this just to see if we can harness this predictive ability for one patient. And we're making progress on that. You wouldn't believe how hard it is. A lot of people think that's the way it already works. It's called a learning health system, that we rely on all of the experience that has ever been had with people in our condition, whatever we're dealing with at the moment, and that all of that information is being used to inform our treatment. And it's just not true. It should be true, but it's not true. It's a lot of data. There are a lot of crazy variables, and we can talk about this on another town hall sometime, because I love this topic. But we're working on that. We have an endowed chair in pediatric rehabilitation. We want to strengthen our offerings in pediatrics. We're adding a faculty position in nutrition. Our nutrition program is growing and growing. So it's actually pretty rare for us to add a new faculty line. And so we are doing that. That's a big vote of confidence in the direction that nutrition is going. So you know, 6, maybe 7 searches. We're not all together settled yet. That's kind of a record year for us. That's a lot of growth, and it's comparable to what the School of Engineering is searching for this year. So it's a lot of growth for our team.
I guess the first word that comes to my mind is thank you. Thank you for growing. I mean, coming from an alum, thank you for growing, Sargent. Thank you for being a leader for us. You know, your leadership is just bringing even more value to the degrees we obtained from Sargent. And thank you for that. We are, you know, every graduate from Sargent is a family, and you're helping to grow our family. And I want you to know how much, you know, and I think I speak for everybody. Thank you. I don't know how many times people thank a dean, but thank you.
You could not say anything nicer to me. That is exactly what I hope to do every morning. So
thank you. Well, thank you. I want to be cognizant of time. It's 8:15. I want to open it up, open the chat if anybody has any further questions or comments for our dean. I want to remind everybody, Alumni Weekend is coming up, and we're going to be in person. We're going to have our roundtable symposium similar to last year. I'm going to have a panel of 3 guests. We're going to be talking about low back pain, something that I'm sure most have experienced at one point in their lifetime or know somebody that has. We're going to have Aaron Yengo Khan with us, who is a human physiology graduate, who is now a neurosurgery resident down at Vanderbilt. He can't wait to come back. We're going to have Diane Dalton from our physical therapy department, who teaches spine and has for, I don't want to date myself, but over 20 years. She's amazing, somebody to this day I continue to look up to. And Sorka Martin, who's new to our faculty, who is a cutting edge leader in terms of treating low back pain. So it's going to be an amazing talk. It's going to be, you can register in person, you can register on Zoom. I think it's a topic that everybody can find interesting because, you know, I wish, you know, statistically 80% of people didn't experience one episode of low back pain, but they do. So it's going to be a wonderful talk. So I hope everybody can join us. Any last minute questions or comments for Dean Moore? And I guess while I wait for those to come in, thank you everybody for taking your time to join us. I hope you are well. I hope your loved ones are well. And no, not a day goes by in my life where I don't think about you. And Sargent is always your home and your family. Okay. I don't see any
thank you
questions.
again, everybody. So great to see you. Thank you so much for your time
Thanks,
and
everyone.
being here.
It's great to
So
Thank
see
you
you.
everyone for coming. Hope to see you Alumni Weekend.